Okay, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the ILO COP26 side event on the dialogue of the Pacific Islands on just transition in Pacific and climate change for jobs. My name is Thomas Ipeni, ILO National Coordinator for Samoa, under the Country Office for Pacific Islands in Super Fiji, and I will be your MC. Few points to note before we proceed. Please mute your microphone when you are not speaking and unmute when it is your turn. Make sure that you turn on your camera when you speak so that the audience can see you. You are not allowed to speak while the panelist is speaking, but you can raise your hand using the hand icon on your screen, or you can post your comments on the chat box and we will respond to you accordingly. Based on the agenda, after the opening session, we're followed by a roundtable discussion and questions. Then we'll have the remarks by the ILO Director for the Pacific Island countries, and followed by the Chief Executive Officer for Ministry of Commerce, Industry and Labor. Now, I would like to introduce our main moderator, Mr. Albert Meredith, who is the Assistant Chief Executive Officer with the Ministry of Labor and the Secretary to Samoa National Tripartite Forum.
Thank you, Tomasi, for the introduction. Talo falava and warm greetings to all our participants. It is my honor to be part of this prestigious event, a dialogue session on just transition in the Pacific and climate action for jobs. At this time, I would now like to call on the Honorable Minister of Commerce, Industry and Labor for Samoa, Honorable Leati Wayne Soya.
Yeah, Talo Falava. Good afternoon, good morning, good evening, and good night. International Labour Organization Director for the Pacific Island countries, Mr. Martin Karimli, distinguished delegates and colleagues, ladies and gentlemen. It is my privilege to address the dialogue on just transition and climate action for jobs in the Pacific. As a region, we are extremely vulnerable with little influence on the outcome. This common challenge means we must come together to develop strategies and adaptation, mitigation, and advocacy. In this respect, continued dialogue and sharing through the Blue Pacific Big Ocean states is key to develop a unified voice and action plan for the global platforms such as Climate Action, Pacific Partnership, and COP meetings. However, climate action should have creation of decent work as a center to ensure sustainable growth and benefits to our communities. During the validation workshop held in March of this year, priorities determined at the 2018 Blue Pacific Big Ocean States knowledge sharing platform were reviewed. Climate action for jobs initiative in Samoa, which included tourism, agriculture, and fisheries, and transport sector. As set out in Just Transition Guidelines, the greening of economies presents many opportunities to achieve social activities. It has the potential to be a new engine of growth, both in advanced and developing economies, and a net generator of decent green jobs that can contribute significantly to poverty eradication and social inclusion. Moreover, the greening of jobs and the promotion of green jobs, both in traditional and emerging sectors. Will foster a competitive, low-carbon, environmentally sustainable economy, which will contribute towards the fight against climate change. On that note, I look forward to our discussions on just transition efforts across the region, including what activities countries have already undertaken and what future plans they have to take climate action and ensure people's jobs as well-being are at the center of transition to a carbon neutral and climate resilient economy. Finally, a special thanks to our Climate Action for Jobs Secretariat for organizing this event to facilitate our Pacific dialogue. Fafitai Telelava. Thank you.
Faftai, and thank you to the Honorable Minister for your important remarks on our session today. I would like now to call on Mr. Martin Karimli, Director for the ILO Office for the Pacific Island countries, for your remarks on the Pacific region's efforts so far.
Thank you very much, Albert, for giving me the floor. Honorable Laitinu Waine Fong, Minister of Commerce, Industry and Labor of the Government of Samoa, Chief Executive Officer of the Ministry of Commerce, Industry and Labor, also Chairman of the National Tripartite Forum, distinguished speakers from Samoa, Fiji, and other countries, my law colleagues, Talafalava, Nisambula Vinaka, and good morning. My name is Martin. I'm Director of ILO Office for Pacific Island countries based in Suva. I'm very pleased to share my opening remarks on behalf of ILO, and we are very delighted as an organization to organize this event in partnership with the government of Samoa. I also extend my sincere appreciation to my colleagues from the ILO Office for Pacific Island countries based in Samoa, in particular Tomasi, our national coordinator in Samoa, and my colleagues in Suva. My special thanks go to our specialists, in particular our senior specialist in climate and environment, Cristina Martinez in the regional office, for the support in organizing this important event, and Laura Hoffner, who will be who organized and supported the organization and will be putting together key messages from today's event to be shared at COP26. Just transition for sustainable development can power a human-centered approach to the future of work that transforms economies and societies, maximizes opportunities for decent work, reduce inequalities, promote social justices, and support industries and enterprises. Small Islands states' commitment to addressing climate change was evidenced when Pacific member countries of ILO participated in the ministerial meeting in Suva, Fiji, 2017. At this meeting, representatives identified climate change as a serious threat and the most challenging issue across borders for all the Pacific. In 2018, a knowledge sharing platform was conducted in Samoa for the member states of Pacific for just transition, decent work, and climate resilience in the Pacific Ocean states. This has enabled the Pacific to engage in the grassroots discussion and knowledge sharing and developing action plan that will voice the position of Big Ocean states in the Climate Action Pacific Partnership, held every year in Fiji as to promote the Pacific in the COP's meeting when Fiji was the leader of the COP23. The issue of climate change was also the focus of future work, where the follow-up was conducted in the Port Moresby in PNG in 2019. At this time, the Blue Pacific Big Ocean states was established under the MOU signed between member states of the Pacific and ILO Director General. Most recently, Samoa stepped up as a leader in pushing for Asia-Pacific commitments in climate change through the Minister of Labor's engagement as the co-chairman of the International Advisory Body for Climate Action for Job Initiative. And in taking this opportunity, I also want to thank personally the Minister for his commitment to this initiative. The Pacific has had a long commitment to addressing climate change. Now, more than ever before, it's critical that Pacific countries continue to raise their voices at the international level and take action to support a just transition in the Pacific region. In conclusion, I'd like to convey our sincere appreciation to governments, workers, and employers' organizations, as well as our partners in civil society organizations, media, and academia for their work on climate change in the Pacific. I also want to thank the Samoan Minister of Commerce, Industry, and Labor, which is at the front line to ensure the Pacific commitment and partnership continues through our ILO national and international programs. We look forward to the continuous engagement and partnership dialogue with all constituents across the Pacific to strengthen our commitment and action towards just transition and decent work. Taking this opportunity, I want to thank all panel speakers who actually agreed to be on the panel at a very short notice. Thank you, Professor Planche. Thank you, Jennifer Fruin, Cheryl Jackson, Patricia Malam, for being with us today. I also want to thank our Fijian speakers and participants who are joining on this event on the public holiday of Diwali. And I wish happy Diwali to all who celebrate it. Thank you very much. And I wish a fruitful discussion during this event. Thank you.
Faftai Lava, and thank you. Thank you, Honorable Minister, Mr. Martin Karimli. I would now like to call on Ms. Laurel Anderson-Hoffner, ILO consultant for gender, environment, and just transition, for her remarks on the COP26 discussions and reporting. Ms. Laurel Hoffner, please take the floor.
Thank you, Chair. I just want to take a couple of minutes to highlight how today's event is actually connected to the broader COP events and the voice of the Blue Pacific Big Ocean states. As the ILO country director in the Pacific has already highlighted some of the important actions that the region has taken. Of course, we all know that the Paris Agreement and the ILO Just Transition Guidelines stress that the creation of decent work is a critical dimension to the response to climate change. And at COP23, which was hosted by Fiji, a working group was established as part of the leadership of the Climate Action Pacific Partnership. And the purpose of that group was to really bring the voice of the Pacific into the COPs as part of the Marrakesh Partnership and to continue the conversation on just transition. And so this working group has been meeting over the last few years, and they met again this morning in Glasgow, and I had an opportunity to participate in that virtually, although there was some people meeting there in person as well. And I wanted to share some of those findings in the conversation to connect all of us here and those of you who are based in the Pacific with the conversation that's happening in Glasgow. So some of the concepts that were covered earlier, we're talking about how decent work is being considered in the negotiations. They also talked a bit about the existing activities and initiatives that are going on globally in terms of advancing towards just transition. And they also talked about increasing the awareness of the opportunities and challenges involved in the just transition among the member states. So at the meeting this morning, one of the main key opportunities and challenges that was discussed was the understanding of the concept of just transition. So this term, just transition, has expanded significantly in recent years, and this is very much welcome progress. But as the use of the word has expanded, the definitions has also expanded, and just transition is coming to mean different things to different organizations and different parties. So one of the key opportunities that the group discussed was making sure that the definition of just transition is developed by workers, employers, and governments, and that it relies on the ILO's definition, which came from that tripartite mechanism. So the ILO defines just transition as more than an assessment or an evaluation of environmental policies. Rather, it's a transition towards environmentally sustainable economies that deliver green jobs and decent work for all. And of course, that are based on tripartite solutions and social dialogue. Another area that was discussed was that financing remains both a challenge and an opportunity. Adequate national and international financing for climate change is essential to the implementation of the Paris Agreement, but we all know that the current financing mechanisms to address the objectives, especially in terms of the just transition towards decent work, is definitely lacking at this time. So international climate finance needs to be directed towards existing programs and initiatives that create support to countries in their efforts to integrate employment creation, social protection, and a just transition into their climate mitigation and adaptations policies. And the ILO is involved in this through the Climate Action for Jobs initiative and also the Global Accelerator on Jobs and Social Protection, which aims to create 400 million new jobs and extend social protection to 4 billion people who are currently uncovered. So while many of us were not able to be there in the room this morning in Glasgow, I wanted to share these findings because, again, it's really important that we have this international dialogue and that the Pacific's priorities are strongly communicated and represented among those who are discussing in Glasgow over the coming weeks. So with that being said, please know that your comments today will be written down and shared back with the climate champions and other reporting mechanisms at COP this year. And we'll also be very excited if you join us for another discussion that we'll be having as part of this resilience platform. That event will be hosted by ADB on the 9th of November at 10 a.m. Fiji time. So if you're able to join us for that conversation as well, we would certainly welcome that. And we hope you can be with us at that time. So with that, I would like to hand it back to Mr. Albert Meredith to begin the panel discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, Laurel. And thank you again to our speakers to begin our session, the Honorable Minister, and also, of course, Mr. Martin Karimli for your remarks and importantly, setting the scene for our discussions today. I suppose we will, in the interest of time, we will go directly to the next item on our program. We now begin the roundtable of discussions, and it is my pleasure to be joined by our distinguished panelists. As a background to our discussions, as already mentioned in September 2020, Samoa, through the Minister of Commerce, Industry and Labour, was elected co-chair together with Spain, of the International Advisory Board to the Climate Action for Jobs initiative. This is a key opportunity for the Blue Pacific Big Ocean states to ensure our issues are addressed based on our unique vulnerabilities and also the situation with job creation at the center. In this respect, our esteemed panel will discuss how this pathway to better jobs as part of the Pacific response to climate change can be achieved. We also ask our audience if they can type their questions in the chat, and we will track them and address them at the end of the presentations for all presenters. If time permits, we can also select a few who can ask their questions in person virtually to allow a more organic discussion. Without further ado, I would like to introduce our panelists. Firstly, we have Professor Plange. Professor Plange is a professional and international social scientist with over 30 years of work, which combines technical and managerial experience in development in the regional Pacific Island and Asian countries. Welcome, Professor Plange. Next, we have Ms. Jennifer Ulla Fruin. For your information, Ms. Fruin is the current Vice Chair for the Pacific Islands Private Sector Organization, PIPSO, and the immediate past President for the Samoa Chamber of Commerce. She has been involved with the Samoa Chamber of Commerce Executive Council for a total of 10 years since 2004, advocating and contributing to private sector policy developments and the formation of Samoa's National Private Sector Organization. Welcome, Ms. Jennifer Olafruin. Next, we have Ms. Patricia Malam. Hope I'm saying that right. She is a Fijian social scientist and soulpreneur, specializing in traditional ecological knowledge, disaster risk reduction, and science communication. She has proven experience with developing greenpreneurs through public-private partnerships and an advocate for environmental sustainability through inclusive community participation in economic development. Welcome, Ms. Malam. And finally, we have Ms. Langipoiva Sherelle Jackson. Ms. Langipoiva Sherelle Jackson is a Pacific Islander with a passion for viewing international environmental law and policy from a small island developing state perspective. She is a thematic expert for climate change policy and practice for the IISD SDG Hub, and currently pursuing a PhD in state sovereignty implications of oceans and climate change on Pacific Islands. So as you can see, there's a very impressive profile of participants and panelists for our sessions today. Just as a reminder, we will have allocated 10 minutes per speaker. And again, at the end of all the presentations, we will be trying to address questions, and Mr. Tomasi Penny will be trying to manage that. Now, I'm sure you've all received the concept notes and guidelines and agenda, which had 3 guiding questions. So within those 3 guiding questions, our panelists will be trying to frame their presentations, but there's also room for them to take freedom and explore other areas they think will be useful for this platform. So without further delay, I would like to call upon first Ms. Dr. Plange, if you can take the floor for your presentation. Thank you. Sorry, Professor. I think you're still muted. If you can unmute yourself and begin, please.
Can you hear me? Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you now. Thank you.
Yeah, okay. So thank Bula to all from Fiji, and thank you all for inviting me to be a member of this very important panel, which will address a very important issue facing the whole world and also the Pacific specifically, given its vulnerabilities to climate change. I will speak from the point of view of an academic, so I hope you bear with me. Universities across the world are tackling climate change and building climate resilience through research, training, and partnerships. And this level of work is informed by an interdisciplinary approach to the challenges and opportunities that climate change throws to us, as well as the challenges and opportunities of just transition itself, and the complexities that this transition comes with, as well as the intersection of just transition with the efforts of different countries, especially small island states, to achieve the Sustainable Development Goals. Universities are also responsible and are taking active role in educating the next generation for decent jobs. The Fiji National University, from where I work, is following the same pattern and working in conjunction with other partners in global specific universities to really take research and training relating to transition. As was guided by the initial person who gave us some idea of what this transition is. We view just transition, one, as involving the reconfiguration of technologies or the introduction of new technology with low carbon emissions, and with technologies that are driven by limited or no fossil fuels at all. And then also we view just transition as involving new structures of work and applications of new technology, which in some ways will actually alter the routine of work and the performance of work. So throw to us as academics some significant and important challenges. The transition of the workforce itself, which will involve reskilling people for new jobs, ensuring that jobs that rights of workers are maintained, enhanced, and protected, creating quality jobs which complement the new technologies or revisions of old ones, ensuring equitable access of women, particularly, to new employment opportunities that is created or that comes along with just transition, and providing and ensuring justice at the workplace. These together inform the climate change program that we have at the Fiji National University. It is an interdisciplinary program, and it brings together all the 5 colleges with different expertise, and it emphasizes teaching, learning with the recognition of research as important to understanding and assessing and monitoring different aspects of just transition. And we do this in collaboration with other universities of small island development states. In this sense, we have collaboration with Caribbean universities and small island state universities in South Asia and even in the Atlantic Ocean. We all recall that Fiji chaired COP23, and it therefore gives FNU a particular platform within which not only to teach and research, but also advocate and be part of the national effort responding to the climate crisis, responding to the crisis or the struggles that this transition brings, and responding to efforts to create decent jobs. From this point of view, FNU is a chair, FNU is a member of different established committees. We are a member of the National Policy Committee. We are a member of the National Relocation Committee. And we are also a member of other subcommittees. And our role there is to bring the academic attitude and perspective into some of these issues and identify critical areas of research and those issues that we can align into our teaching programs. Our program at FNU is branded in such a way that its emphasis is on issues of livelihood. In other words, though we understand the science of climate change, we look more specifically at the effects or the impact of climate change. And in this sense, just transition and the complexity fall within the framework of the work that we do. We look at the impact of just transition on work itself, the structure of work, on communities, and on cultures. Our program is sensitive to indigenous practices and the extent to which they can be adapted to or modified as part of the whole response to the climate crisis and building resilience of rural communities. We also are interested in designing preventive practices at local to ensure sustainability of assets and also equip the young for, especially those in rural communities, undertake meaningful work, even at the informal level. Our academic program have what we have higher academic level, the TVET level, and the community. High academic level is usually undergraduate programs. We bring together expertise from medicine and health and medical sciences, agriculture, fisheries, food science and food security, environmental impact assessment, environmental engineering, and education and humanities, including, as I mentioned before, issues relating to indigenous knowledge and practices. And these are, at the undergraduate level, they are embedded in different undergraduate programs. And at the postgraduate level, it becomes issues of both teaching and research. Research in areas of interest by a particular student. But we ensure that any research that is undertaken is not done for the sake of research, but it has a focus that will contribute to our understanding of and providing recommendations to aspects of climate resilience, including aspects of just transition. And as I mentioned earlier, we keep at the back of our mind, transition means transformation in technologies, transformation in the work structure, and transformations in the workforce itself. So this is in broad sense, the kinds of things that we do at the higher academic level. So the program at the postgraduate level, you can get your postgraduate diploma through taking 6 core units, which include both mandatory and elective units. At the GPET level, which has become a very important area of emphasis, we have diploma in various courses ranging from agriculture to environment to fisheries. And in order to ensure that we keep abreast with technological changes relating to the just transition of technologies, each program will have or does have an industry advisory committee. In that way, the programs that we develop are they're complementary to new technologies and the new ideas that are emerging within industry and the business sector. And then we have a National Trade and Productivity Center whose responsibility specifically is reskilling current workers in relation to new technologies. They do this once again in conjunction and in consultation with the private sector and the business community. At the lower level, we have a sustainable livelihood program with emphasis specifically in rural communities, where we provide technical and vocational training for youth in rural communities in specific areas of the country. So what FNU tries to do as a response to the climate crisis facing is not only to teach and research, but also do practical training at the lower level. I'm using the word not out of inferiority, but in scale from the formal sector, informal sector, the rural sector. This is where most of our young people are. And the idea is to equip them with skills that they can use to do the kinds of work they intend to do the levels where they are. Our role as a community could be threefold. First, to build capacity for climate change adaptation, focus on the issues relating to just transition. We engage and work with government and national climate and private sector related committees to undertake research and design policy or policy implementation. And then we are committed to build adaptation and resilience. Especially, we have some of our staff working with communities in areas of security and food storage, where we take into consideration existing practical traditional knowledge systems and the extent to which they are adaptable to or they can be modified in response to the climate crisis. Our work that we do also recognizes the shared challenges to the adverse effects of climate change faced by Pacific Island countries. In this sense, we collaborate with international, and we have been recently collaborating with the ILO to focus on two areas so far. One is rethinking protection systems as a way of providing assistance to the vulnerable in the broad context of just transition and the possibility of loss of jobs. We also to examine the migration in Pacific Island countries or from Pacific Island countries as an adaptive response to some of the inherent challenges of climate change broadly and to just transition, bearing in mind that this is not something to be achieved overnight. It's a long process. And the technologies, all of them have to be supported with investment by private sector. In the interim or in the process, Pacific Island countries are unemployment. So how are they responding to the crisis of unemployment and to the triple threat that Pacific Island face? When I say triple threat, I'm referring to the impact of climate change, that's one, the effects of disasters, and what we have learned within the past 2 years, the effect of a totally unprecedented natural disaster, COVID-19, difficulties. In the end, what we
sorry, Professor.
Yeah, my
sorry,
last
Professor.
sentence.
Okay, yeah, please continue.
My last
please
sentence.
continue.
So what we're doing now is that the work that we're doing with support the ILO, of the shared challenges of climate change and just transition, is to collaborate with universities from other 6 countries to identify the common platform for collaboration in relation to just transition, decent work, and great jobs. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Professor, and apologies for interrupting at the end.
Yeah.
Thank you for the presentation. Very interesting work that is currently being done by the Fijian National University, working with partners to undertake research, especially training on just transition, which, as Laurel mentioned before, is still a very fluid concept across our Pacific Island countries and I think globally. And it's good to hear you guys are doing work and have established a framework trying to understand, what just transition really entails for countries. Thank you very much. And at this moment, I would like to call upon Ms. Patricia Malam, if you can take the floor for your presentation. Thank you very much.
Ulavinaka, everyone. Can you see that? And can you hear me clearly? If you want to just give me a thumbs up to let me know.
Yes, we can. Thank you.
Okay, great. Thank you very much for having me on the panel today. Thank you, Albert, and Bulavinaka to everyone who's joining us, especially to those of you celebrating or observing Diwali. So I'll just take you through what I will cover in my presentation today. I'm representing the Fiji Commerce and Employers Federation, and I will give you a very brief introduction of what the Federation does. And then we'll take you through just the sweet spot, which I consider is the space for where green jobs and just transition fits in. Then I'll give you a couple of case studies from our private sector members, and then just cover very briefly some challenges and some opportunities, and moving on to how we can make a difference. So the Fiji Commerce and Employers Federation is Fiji's national private sector organization, and it is made up of 10 councils. FSAF, as it is more commonly known, its position is quite unique in that it represents and is involved in activities which ranges from airlines to warehouses, and also having 2 councils that cater for women in business, which is called the Women Entrepreneurs Business Council, as well as the Young Entrepreneurs Council. And although it is a not-for-profit organization which is funded through member contributions, it is also a beneficiary of grants from organizations such as the ILO and the Training and Productivity Authority of Fiji. So FSAF's long-term objective is to decrease its dependence on revenue for members and fulfill the objective by planning activities and training programs. So from ILO, what we've learned is that over the next decade, we expect to see millions of new jobs created globally due to new climate policies and commitments. There's an estimated 24 million jobs that we expect to be created that will fall into the green economy by 2030. And we can see this already in LinkedIn when you're reviewing jobs that are being made available, recruitment advertisements that come out. And there's this huge shift to hiring for green economy, and it's already underway worldwide. And since 2017, we've seen this push with green talent acquisition and green skills readily being increased by government and companies. And as Professor had alluded to earlier, there are even education curriculums currently being designed to cater for this huge demand and shift. So I'd like to invite you to just take a step back right now and think about your own career choices, just for a couple of minutes, and in particular, what you do currently to remain economically active. So I guess sharing this space with professionals such as you, I have no doubt that you would have at some point come across the concept of ikigai. Ikigai is a Japanese concept that means your reason for being, your life and what it's worth. And what I find most intriguing about this model is that in order to fully appreciate your reason for being, you need to find a sweet spot where the elements align. So I don't know, but I don't think it's a coincidence that things like the triple bottom line approach also aims to find the sweet spot. And it indicates that it is in the best interest of businesses to move towards a greener way of doing things. And in a similar fashion, the concept of green jobs also aims to find that sweet spot where the elements function effectively. So the following slides that I will take you through show how 3 of our members at the Fiji Commerce and Employers Federation have proactively made a move towards a just transition. I apologize that I will not be covering as many sectors as I would like to, as I wasn't given enough time to prepare for this, but I would like to add that there are members of FSAF that are engaged in other sectors, such as agriculture, retail, and even fashion, who are already doing these things to move towards a just transition. So after the presentation, you're welcome to get in touch if you'd like to know more or find out who these businesses are. So this is the first case study. Coca-Cola Fiji has been providing refreshments to Fiji and the Pacific region for over 40 years. They are a significant contributor to the Fijian economy and provide direct employment for more than 250 locals. They have facilities in Laucala Beach Estate, which is in the Central Division, Nasinu. They also have other warehouses in Lautoka and Lambasa in other islands. They've invested heavily in the Mission Pacific program, which is a recycling behavioral program. You might have heard about this. And they also encourage other manufacturers to sign up to responsible marketing and children policy campaigns to invest in initiatives that promote active living and education. But more importantly, Coca-Cola now operates a 1.1 megawatt solar rooftop system, which is the largest privately funded solar grid in the South Pacific. The other case study of one of our members, Mark One Apparel, and it is a clothing manufacturing facility. It became the region's first solar-powered clothing manufacturing facility, and this is after the leading Sunergies Fiji Limited installed a 273 kilowatt roof-mounted solar system. So it was launched in 2014 by Sunergies and Mark One, and the system produces 350 megawatt of renewable energy annually, and it displaces 260 tons of carbon dioxide. So that's the equivalent of planting 1,300 trees, I am told. The solar panels were installed by Synergize and their partners Play Energy. And now this enables Mach 1 to save thousands of dollars in electricity costs and potentially improve its carbon footprint. Our next case study is Star Printery, another member of the Fiji Commerce and Employers Federation. It is a family-owned and operated business located in Suva. It has more than 12 years of experience with aiming towards a just transition. So they made this move proactively as they decided to follow Australia and New Zealand standard of purchasing press consumables which were not harmful, firstly to the operators who worked for them and then the environment. So over the years, they've completely stopped using anything that is harmful for their operators. So they did away with consumables such as protective gear that was required to work with harmful chemicals. And what they've done is they've replaced all of their consumables with green and eco-friendly chemicals. They've changed all of their offset inks from mineral-based to from mineral oil-based inks to vegetable-based inks. So these are more commonly known as green inks. And they've also changed their paper procurement policy to purchase from suppliers who buy from mills that have certifications. For example, one of the certifications is the Forest Stewardship Council. So this then means that the mills that they're buying from are not cutting down trees and contributing to deforestation. So in essence, it means looking at the supply chain and selecting providers for their materials who align with their sustainability policy. So what's the holdup? And what is the challenge for us now? And from what I've experienced from working in the private sector, a lot of the transition initiatives that we're exposed to are not designed for the Pacific. So a lot of the literature on just transition focuses on developed economies. And as much as we like to aspire to those, I think being in the Pacific, being in Fiji, you need to learn to adapt, or businesses need to adapt those westernized solutions for our landscape. But then there's this urgent need to address the impacts of climate change, and then developing countries already face burdens. Like we heavily rely on fossil fuels to generate a lot of the activities. So how can we, with fewer resources and very limited social safety nets, manage these threats to environment and livelihoods? And our countries, as we all know, are less culpable for global emissions, and then begs the question of, is it fair to expect us to share the burden of reducing emissions when we're in a state of trying to develop and serve the people? Secondly, there's this whole power dynamics and the political economy challenges. So that in itself comes to play a role, especially in the mining and energy intensive heavy industries, where a lot of the communities rely on those. Political realities and obstacles to just transition should be more explicitly discussed. And what we need are more case studies that will consider the importance of localizing context. And that would be really beneficial, especially for the Pacific. One of the other challenges is the local level capacity, or rather the gaps in local level capacity. And national mandates and plans to address just transitions can be necessary to support local action in some cases, but then this needs to filter through to education systems and not just at university level. These require a shift in the curriculum, even as young as early primary and secondary school level. And in order for just transitions to work, the process needs to be owned at the local or regional level, not just high-level policy discussions. The other challenge is that the inclusion or lack of inclusion of the informal sector. So in Fiji, the bulk of the workforce is in the informal sector, and without any formal safety net, these workers are more vulnerable and at greater risk of losing their livelihoods. For example, if a garment factory shuts down, workers along their supply chains and their communities will be affected. Some workers in informal sectors are represented in associations, but most cannot unionize and lack a voice in how transitions are planned And then this places them at a disadvantage. The other challenge is gender and race dimensions. And in industrial transition situations, this most places a burden on women especially. So, for example, in traditional agricultural communities, women are unable to break free from gender norms and simultaneously face demands to take on paid employment or even entrepreneurial work when family incomes decline. So to realize just transition, social protection programs and worker assistance need to take account of women's and other minority needs and concerns. So designing a transition for specific needs. And this is the same for Indigenous people and ethnic minorities who often have unequal access to social services. And then lastly, the biggest challenge is that there's an overlap between environmental, social, and governance movement and just transition. So the factors firmly tend to put more focus on the environmental component, but we don't fully understand the social impact of a just transition as yet. So this leads us into thinking that, you know, there needs to be stronger human resources capabilities that are able to manage the just transition, and also taking into account the youth population that are coming into the workforce and their mental health needs in the context of COVID. So what are some things that we can consider to build back better and to regenerate? So firstly, inclusion. My recommendation would be all stakeholders must be acknowledged and their roles defined. Absolutely including the informal sector and communities. And this action plan requires input at all levels of the community. Secondly, I would suggest that, you know, we need to design frameworks for locals with locals, and we need to design a just transition framework for the people by understanding what their needs are, and even more so where they are in the process of just transition. There's also a need for an intersectoral approach. So taking a holistic approach to all sectors that are engaged in the economy, you know, whether it's infrastructure, transportation, waste management, agriculture, and the protection of waterways and shorelines, especially so in the context of the Pacific. And lastly, the most important one for me would be valuing the importance of traditional knowledge and practices that are more planet and people friendly. So from my research and from experience, I know that these practices have lasted centuries, and our ancestors must have been doing something right. So in order for us to move forward with conviction, we need to look back. And what can we do? Right now, what we've seen is we've had the impacts of climate change affect us for the last 5 years, at least, more intensely than ever before. But then we had COVID, and the global response was a lot more urgent than it has been for climate change. And it begs the question of why. And I guess it is because if you have something that threatens businesses, that threatens the economic livelihood of people, then immediately people take action. We've got things like the no jab, no job policy, but why haven't we done this when it came to losing communities and jobs because of climate change? And this is where I think we all have a role to play, not just individually, but as institutions. There needs to be a sense of urgency, and we need to look at the economic indicators that can help us realize that the effects of climate change can be, in fact, more detrimental to just the effects of the pandemic. So in closing, I'd like to thank you, and I look forward to the question and answers.
Thank you. Thank you very much for that very interesting and informative presentation on some of the work that's been done by the Fiji Commerce and Employers Federation, and also interesting to see some of the renewable energy initiatives and just transition that has been adopted by some of the core businesses in Fiji. We also share your sentiments on the common but differentiated responsibilities in regards to climate change and the impacts of climate change on the Pacific Island countries. I now take this opportunity to give the floor to our next speaker, Ms. Jennifer Olafruin. Please take the floor.
Thank you very much, Moderator Albert Meredith. Honorable Minister Liatinu Wayne Fong, Chief Executive Officer for the Ministry of Commerce, Industry and Labour, Pulotu Lyndon Chuling, Your Excellencies, panelists, delegates, and ladies and gentlemen. Talofa lava and warm greetings to you all. I wish to acknowledge the International Labour Organization for having me as a panelist today. I certainly am not an expert in the topic of just transition in the Pacific and climate actions for jobs. However, I do wish to share some thoughts on this focus this afternoon on some of the things we are doing and advocating for in this area that I trust are similar across our countries to further strengthen our position on the need to invest more to build resilient and facilitate just transition in our region. My reflection this afternoon will focus on discussing some of the key challenges for green skills developments and some of the opportunities that there are for us in our countries. Specialized skills in general, the availability, development, and retention is one of the key issues for not only Samoa, but one that is common across the Pacific Island countries. This is before the heightened demand for climate change and green skills. This places the challenge of green skills development pivotal to address. So in summary, some of the key challenges that I wish to share would include the need to accelerate the mainstreaming of policies and strategies for climate change education. This has been brought to the forefront of our countries due to the critical issues of climate change to our region. There is also a need to integrate green skills into our education curriculum. The integration of the real-world climate and the environmental issues into the education systems and programs. There is also a need to address the knowledge gaps, the educators' gaps, and the climate change knowledge in our countries. There is a need for greater engagement of our communities to translate climate targets into the education systems, using Indigenous knowledge, developing capacities of the community to engage actively and with policymakers to participate in green jobs creation. More than ever, the need for resilient infrastructure, developing infrastructure to become more resilient to climate change impact, and using built resilient infrastructure to further raise awareness in the communities. So overall, the education systems and community project needs to prepare our future generations to deal with a world of increased climate events. Dedicated support to help business communities fully embrace and engage in these initiatives that are going on globally on just transition. Some of the examples here in Samoa, particularly for Samoa Chamber of Commerce, we have just been very fortunate to our Green Climate Fund program for approving to fund a dedicated resource to help the Samoa Chamber of Commerce and the private sector businesses access green financing mechanisms that are available. We are fully aware and fully understand some of the challenges when it comes to access of these green finances. So it's been pivotal to be able to get that dedicated support to help businesses access that facility. Secondly, is the reskilling of employers. I know this was also touched upon by some of our panelists earlier, but definitely the reskilling of employers and our businesses to better respond to the climate challenges and to be productive and effective in the new types of green roles and transition. Support for businesses to strengthen. So these are some of the areas that we can help for the businesses, is support for businesses to strengthen business continuity and recovery plans. This has also been one of the key things that the Samoa Chamber of Commerce has focused on in the recent past years, is the support to ensure that our businesses and our employees respond better to climate events. Lastly, on the question of what role does women leadership play for businesses to transition to sustainable practices, on my reflection, leaders in general have a very crucial role. Leaders act as key advocates for green job creation in not just our organizations, but our countries and our region. We become role models and become leaders to transition change and green jobs into our businesses and countries. There is a need to make key decisions to ensure just transition and the achievements of sustainable development goals are accelerated and achieved in our region. Thank you very much for the opportunity, International Labour Organization and the organizers for this event. I'm very privileged, and I trust and hope that my reflections and sharing this afternoon has helped create and some discussions on this very vital topic across our region. Thank you. Untitled Lava.
Thank you very much, Ms. Jennifer Lafruin, for your. I'm noting the comments on assistance for support businesses to adopt just transition initiatives, also the reskilling and upskilling of workers, and integrating COVID and climate change recovery plans, especially that leaders must use their platform to promote climate. I would like now to call upon the final speaker, Ms. Lanipo Oiva, Cheryl Jackson. Please, Ms. Lanipo Oiva, take the floor.
Thank you so much. Honorable Latino Wayne Fong, CEO, the Director of ILO, Martin Carmili, our esteemed moderators and panelists, thank you so much for the opportunity to present this afternoon where I am. I'm just going to share my screen. Please let me know when you can see it. Albert, just to confirm if you can see the screen.
Yes, we can see, Cheryl.
Excellent. Thank you. So I'm speaking today as a member of the Women in Climate Change Initiative, which is part of a multi-stakeholder platform created in 2017 under Conservation International and the Ministry of Natural Resources and Environment, also in partnership with the International Labour Organization. Now, I was invited in my previous role as the SIDS coordinator for ILO in Samoa and the coordinator of the Samoa National Action Plan on Youth Employment. It's always great to get an invitation from ILO because I see ILO's role in adaptation to climate change economy-wide as quite key, given the vulnerabilities that we continue to face in the Pacific as a result of the climate crisis. You know, the just transition is essential in preparing our small island states for what is to come. So I wanted to, the previous speakers have highlighted amazing work already done in Fiji and in Samoa. And I would like to commend Patricia on the way that she did frame some of the regional approaches and some of the case studies from Fiji, which really should be replicated in other countries. And then just bring forward, I'd like to really focus on how Samoa through the work of the tripartite and ILO in 2015, began looking at the issue of green jobs and integrating this and taking this at the national level. So just briefly as a case study, the Greenworks initiative began in Samoa in 2015 under the Samoa National Action Plan on Youth Employment, and also in the initial formulation of the Youth Employment Program. Now, what we did here, there was funding under CEDA through ILO to explore Greenworks and green jobs in Samoa and see how this can be approached from a national level, but in a sustainable manner. So this, I wanted to put up this picture because it's a historical picture in that this is the first time that this issue was discussed in Samoa, and the buy-in was quite extraordinary. In this particular photo, there's directors from the Secretariat of the Pacific Regional Program, there's Ministry of the Environment, there's Labor, we have IGOs, NGOs, private sector, public sector, and grassroots. Now, the reason why that's unique is because this issue, and as we further progress into the adverse impacts of climate change in Samoa and in the Pacific, it's not something that should be done in silos. It shouldn't just be government or the tripartite that does it. It should also include grassroots communities who are not naturally part of the ILO platform. So this was extremely successful. It brought everyone together to establish this platform Greenworks initiative, and also kickstarted the Samoa internship program under the Samoa Chamber of Commerce, which took into consideration green jobs and Greenworks. So the initial activity that we did to kind of get government and private sector and public sector to kind of familiarize themselves with the idea of green jobs and Greenworks was we were responding to national need. So it's not that we came in and said, okay, we can create green jobs. We actually came in and said, okay, how can we sustainably set an example of green jobs without duplicating existing efforts, without adding any further burden to the work of government. And so the first port of call was the Ministry of Natural Resources and Environment, and they outlined their labor needs to support in installing signage in APIA for tsunami preparedness. Now, I know this is not climate change, but this was definitely a green job for the youth that we brought together. Then an MOU had to be created between environment, DMO, and then we had to identify the young people who would be youth contractors. Now, fortunately, the Samoa Red Cross Society is a very active volunteer community, over 300 volunteers, youth volunteers from across the 4 islands. So they were already an established entity. We then just had to train the youth, get their contracts set up and have them aware of OSH training, provide them with equipment, safety gear, and technical support. And then they basically carried out the work directly with the Ministry of Environment. So the MNRE took on the contractors in their respective kind of Greenworks capacity. I'm just going to run through this because I know that in the interest of time, I don't want to take too much time. So the key success factors of this particular approach in creating green jobs or greening the environment, the labor sector, so to speak, was we identified a policy gap, approached it through the relevant channels of government while collaborating with NGOs and private sector, responded to national need, did not duplicate the work. We integrated community resilience through job creation. So that's also, taking into account that kids young people who didn't have jobs and didn't have an avenue to maintain a green job. We filled the gap using collaborative partnership, linked disaster resilience, job creation, community involvement, and capacity building. And overall, that is the key to resilience when it comes to climate change, is that you you build resilience, but also that it's sustainable in nature. So these were the alignments under the relevant international conventions that we worked with under the Paris Agreement and the Sendai framework. So for the future of the just transition, that these are some of the points that I took from that particular case study, but also in my work with other governments in the Pacific on effectively communicating climate change in the Pacific region. And one, to strengthen relationship between environment and labor nationally, this was a missing element at the time, was that environment really needed to regard the fact that in climate projects, they could create jobs and could green the economy in the process of implementation. And this was a missing area at the time. So additional points to note is streamline existing efforts in integrating climate change in the future of work, categorize and recognize existing efforts already in place nationally as part of just transition. And I think what I mean by this is that in Samoa, there's so many examples of greening the economy, sustainable livelihoods, as well as job creation in the green sector. And it was just a matter of categorizing and recognizing that the employers were already doing this. So I think that's important in order to then accurately capture the fact that countries are already doing this, just not under this particular lens. That green jobs are integrated into future climate projects. So as part of this particular case study, we also managed to integrate about 15 jobs into a developing climate project at the time. And that so has built in a sustainability mechanism to the example that we were setting. And of course, because I'm here representing women in climate change, that women's role in adapting to climate change is integral and should be integrated in consultations, but also integrated in implementation and in the future, any future considerations in the world of work. And then finally, that all of government considers future climate impacts on economy, infrastructure, and world of work, and make adjustments accordingly. Now, essentially, this is just transition, but how that translates, to the reality on the ground is something that should be considered, and practical approaches should be taken on. And this is a nice picture of some of the youth that we worked with who ended up being quite successful in their contractor business and have been hired on numerous occasions by government ministries to support their work. So once again, thank you so much for the opportunity, and congratulations to everyone for continuing this amazing work. First time.
Hi, thank you very much. Thank you, Lava lang po Iva. That's a very informative presentation on Green Works initiative that was carried out, and how we can, I suppose, realistically carry out green work initiatives with the collaboration of both of all of governments, NGOs, and also private sector. It also notes, the integration of green jobs in climate projects and planning, and including inclusivity, of course, to ensure women are involved at all levels. Thank you very much. And this brings us to the Q&A portion or segments of our program. And I suppose at this opportunity, I'd like to give to our audience, those participating and listening in, if you would like to pose some questions to our participants, or if you have general comments, please either type in chat or also raise your hand. I think this is a good opportunity. We have a good amount of time that we can delve into some of the issues. So please indicate if you have any questions or comments you would like to express.
Albert, may I ask a question to our speakers, please?
Please go ahead, Martin.
Thank you very much. Well, I just was taking some notes from the panel and trying to capture key points, and my notes went beyond 2 pages. So many interesting ideas, and thank you very much, Professor Planch, Jennifer, Cheryl, and Patricia, for very interesting ideas. This is an excellent opportunity for ILO, as you are here and sharing your views. I would like to ask you, colleagues, what would be 1 or 2 key practical areas would like ILO to focus for the upcoming projects based on your own experience? Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anyone that would like to respond to the question raised by Martin on what sort of projects and focus we? Miss Jennifer Ola Fruin has put her hand up. Fruin.
Thank you very much, Your Excellency Martin. And in response on some of the key focus areas for ILO, the area of reskilling and upskilling has become prominent across the panelists. And from my humble observation, we feel that this is something that we do need to prioritize as a matter of urgency across our region, to ensure that our businesses, our employees, and our countries are better prepared for green jobs, and also the transition that has eventuated due to the climate events. Secondly, I have also touched on the need for mainstreaming of the climate change agenda in our education systems. We do feel that this also needs to be given priority, so that our future generations and our younger generations are also better prepared to address and respond to any climate change issues. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Miss Fruin. I can see Miss Patricia Malam has her hand up. If you would like to join in on the conversation, please, Ms. Malam.
Yes, absolutely. One of my suggestions, or actually 2 of the suggestions, would be focus areas around mental health and well-being, because in light of the current pandemic, we've seen how workforces have had to be reduced, and then now we're seeing people go back to work, but we've also seen people completely change careers. But then where is the psychosocial support to enable people to make those transitions? So I think in the space of just transitions, we also need to think of mental health and well-being. The other area that I would suggest that support be channeled towards would be towards empowering youth through not just formal educational programs, but also soft skills, because the current pandemic has shown us that you need more than just academic qualifications to maneuver this space. So it would be advisable to get more soft skill training or institutional support to manage that sort of sharing of skills. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Malam. And I'd like to now give the floor to Ms. Langpoiva. Oh, sorry, I'll just give the floor to Ms. Langpoiva. She has her hand up, and then after that, I'll give the opportunity to you, Ms. Professor. Thank you.
Sure, thank you.
Just a quick point, as Director did point to the panelists, but I think what's key is that the labor sector, so the MSIL workers or those who work in the labor sector, do need to have some sort of training on climate change, so that they have an awareness of climate impact into the future in the world of work. And I think that's a sustainable way of ensuring that greening the economy or just transition is part of their perspective when they are working in the field, but also making policies on labor. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Jackson. Professor, please take the floor.
Yeah, thank you very much. My comment and my observation it relates to the presentation by from the Fiji Commerce and Employment representative. She did a good presentation on the changes in work structures and the extent to which, hello, can you hear me? Hello? Hello?
Yes, please proceed, Professor.
Okay, what I was referring to is the presentation from the Fiji Commerce and Employment representative, that from the workers' perspective, we really need to understand or explore the extent to which the workers have become adjusted to their new work structures and work routines, and the impact of this change on their health. Because I had mentioned that the just transition, there are two levels. First, reconfiguring the technology itself, and then reshaping the workforce to complement the technology. So some element of adjustment needs to be made by the workers. What are these, and how comfortable are they with these adjustments? And what do they think are the effects of this on themselves? Hello? Hello?
Talofa. Yes, thank you, Professor.
Did you hear me?
Yes,
Okay.
No, we got that. So were you looking for a response from anyone in particular, or just raising a comment?
No, just an observation, something that we could work at later.
Thank you. That is noted. I'd just like to give the last opportunity. Sorry, because we're running out of time. We're supposed to finish at 2 p.m. So the last opportunity will go to Kinan. Please take the floor, Kinan.
Thank you much. Thanks to everyone speech from the Pacific Island countries in Suva. My questions to the panelists about how we can cope with the juster transition in an environment where it's not really linear. Having said that, the development aspect, the development cycle of the countries are always threatened by the frequency of the natural disasters, where it's always push back the situation, or it's kind of like pull it towards accessibility, the impact on for instance, or on the etc. So how we can have an in-parallel strategy or coherence, like while we are like promoting this juster transitions, we also ensure that there will be we are coping with the frequency of the disasters that are faced in the region. So I would be interested to hear your thoughts on that, or maybe some of the examples that you have experienced while doing your work or research. Thank you.
Thank you for that, Kinan. I suppose if I can throw this question to Ms. Langipoiva Jackson, if you might have a response to that in relation to the question raised by Kinan on just transition.
Sure. Thank you, Kinan. I think this is really important. Sorry, I only caught the first part of your question on the fact that there are, differentiating scenarios and how this can be approached. Climate change impacts the Pacific Islands to varying degrees. The experience by atoll nations and by volcanic nations differ. The experience by smaller economies versus, middle income countries differ as well. And so So therefore, the responses should adjust accordingly. And that is something that should be defined by the national governments. It should be set on the context of those particular economies. And it really should not be a one template fits all, if that makes sense. That it should really be defined by what is appropriate locally, what is realistic, and doesn't add an additional burden to the national governments.
Thank you. Thank you very much for that response, Ms. Langit-Boiva Jackson. I suppose at this point in time, given we are now approaching the end of our session, sorry, are we on?
Yes, sorry, Albert. I just wanted to add, if I may, just a couple of lines to what Ms. Jackson said in response to Kinan's question. I just wanted to say that, like, as much as we're putting a lot of, efforts into planning for a just transition and how we expect it to roll out in the context of severe natural hazards, we need to also look at how we plan better for recovery efforts. So just as well as we're planning for preparing for these things to happen, we also need to prepare for the recovery and all of the things that happen after that. So, we need to have a plan A, and A. It's not about A, B, or C in any order of preference. It needs to be what is the next step. And we need to be very realistic and practical about what recovery looks like. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Malam. Final response intervention. I see that comments and there are questions posted in the comments, and if you can allow us an opportunity after the meeting, we will respond accordingly. Thank you very much for your patience. And I guess at this point in time, I'd like to thank again our panelists for your interventions and presentations this afternoon. And I hand it back to our MC, Mr. Tomasi Penny, to continue and close our session.
Thank you, Albert, and thank you very much to our speakers. This time I would like to invite our Director for the Pacific Island countries, Mr. Martin Karimli, for his final remarks before I pass it on to the Chief Executive Officer of Ministry of Commerce, Industry and Labor from Samoa.
Thank you very much, Tomasi. I want to thank, first of all, Honorable Minister for providing keynote speech at this event, and our esteemed speakers for sharing their views based on their very rich experience. I specifically asked the question, because I wanted to have some takeaways for ILO and for our office to focus on in the future. And many interesting things have been mentioned. We do understand, it has been acknowledged by all speakers, how serious the climate change concerns are in the Pacific. And we also understand that the Pacific countries, they are committed to the climate change dialogue, and Pacific countries actually lead the dialogue. And the one example is the role of Samoa is playing in the minister's role as the co-chair of the International Advisory Board on Climate Action for Job initiative. Our speakers have touched upon very important areas, the interdisciplinary approach to climate change, importance of introduction of new technologies. The role of education has been emphasized by speakers, how important it is to focus on the curriculum programs, mainstreaming policies in the education programs, and the role of labor migration was also mentioned. Another key area is the role the private sector is playing in building climate resilience, introduction of new technologies, and building of capacity. Interesting idea came from Patricia when she mentioned, green jobs as a tool to find sweet spots, combining decent work, green products, and environmentally friendly solutions. And some examples were provided from FSEF. Thanks to Jennifer for stressing the importance of investment into building resilience and facilitating a just transition, and also stressing the importance of integrating green skills in education curriculums, need for wider engagement for all communities, use of indigenous knowledge, and again, this also was mentioned by almost all speakers, that we should make use of the traditional knowledge and use indigenous knowledge in green job creation. Raising awareness is still important despite various awareness raising activities and campaigns undertaken by governments, workers, employers, and by ILO. There is more need for raising awareness. The importance of women leadership has been mentioned and stressed, which is crucial in building green jobs, and the role of role models in the region has been mentioned by our speakers. Thank you to Cheryl for sharing your experience, previous experience with ILO on the Green Job Work Initiative, and also importance of focusing on strengthening relationship between environment and labor, and streamlining existing efforts to integrate climate change in the future of work, and women's role in adapting to climate change. So my key takeaways and ILO representatives, and I thank my ILO colleagues for being online, would be the key areas to focus. I take note of some ideas and suggestions you have made, colleagues. Reskilling and upskilling, mainstreaming climate change agenda in educational systems, mental health and well-being, empowering youth through different programs, and an importance of various training programs on climate change and impact on future of work. So this would be our takeaways, and I want to thank all colleagues, our colleagues from the Samoan government, Albert for moderating this session, Tomasi for being our MC, and Laurel for providing very important support to this event, and all participants and speakers for their valuable contribution. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Martin. It's a privilege to invite the Chief Executive Officer of the Ministry of Commerce, Industry and Labour for his closing remarks.
Mr. Martin Karimli, distinguished delegates and colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, on behalf of Honorable Minister Leatinuu, I would like to congratulate our distinguished speakers and organizers for a successful dialogue session today. We will leave this dialogue with a higher appreciation and understanding of the work that has been undertaken across our Blue Pacific Big Ocean states to address climate change with just transition at the center. While many actions have been taken, the recent COVID-19 pandemic has significantly impacted social and economic health of Pacific Islands countries and slowed progress on these important issues. Despite the challenges of COVID-19, I would like to echo the sentiments shared by Honorable Minister Leatinuu that Samoa is committed to continued dialogue to build a stronger Pacific Island voice, not only for climate change, but also creation of decent, productive, and inclusive employment. I wish you all a successful meeting of the COP26, and importantly, that we continued unified action to address these very real impacts on our small island states. And all the best.
Ladies and gentlemen, conclude our side event today. The report of the side events will be shared with the Secretary of the COP26 and hope our ILO team will be able to share with you all. I hope you have a good and safe evening or afternoon from where you are connecting from. Thank you once again from us here in Samoa and the ILO Pacific. We say Untitled Lava to Fasoifua.
Nata.